Well, we made it to Friday. Welcome to Friday, February 26, 2021. Thanks for tuning in to the Day Weather Podcast today. What's in store for the last days of February and as we peek into March? Well, as we go into the weekend, it's going to be chilly, windy with mountain snow. Through the weekend, it's going to be cold, not brutally cold, just chilly, especially with the wind chill. We're going to see another nice shot of snow in the mountain areas. The high country will see another good round of snow over the next 24 to 36 hours, but we're not expecting much on the plains. A little bit, but not a lot, which has been the case all winter long. March is looking like it may come in like a lamb. Throughout the week, we've been talking about maybe a larger storm system midweek, but that's fading. It may not be much of a system, and if that storm doesn't develop, we could see the first week of March, well, spring-like. It may not last, but we may have some spring-like weather for the start of March. Also, I want to let folks know about a great paper that's just been brought to my attention by Colorado State Cooperative Extension about planning for La Nina and El Nino episodes when it comes to stocking. I know a lot of folks are worried about the situation with the dryness that we had in 2020. It's continuing in the 2021. What are you going to do this spring and summer when it comes to stocking? Well, there's a great new paper that talks about the relationship between long-range forecasts and whether you're in a La Nina and an El Nino, and maybe some recommendations. And I'll show you that at the end of the podcast. This is where we're looking at winter storm warnings, high wind warnings, and advisories for winter weather. And you can see, this is a trend we've seen for most of the winter season. We get these snows coming into the Pacific Northwest and into the mountain areas. That's where you see the purple and the pink colors here. Those indicate winter storm warnings or winter weather advisories. Then we have the high wind situation right here along and east of the Continental Divide. And that's what we're going to be looking at as we go through today and into early Saturday, is where the rough weather is going to be. Wind on the plains, snow in the high country. This all due to a jet stream wind that's taking a dive out of Alaska and carving out a broad trough in the western United States. Still a tremendous amount of cold air, but the worst of the cold stays locked up. But nonetheless, we're in a northwest flow here, so it's going to be chilly through the weekend. A little bit of a wave right here. Doesn't look like much, does it? But it's going to come through and bring a nice shot of snow to the high country and more wind and colder weather to the plains. This is where that same system is up there by Saturday night into Sunday morning. But it's a system, notice, that's breaking apart into two pieces. This gets split right here, so the system is going to head into the Great Lakes. This other system is going to come down here and weaken as it heads south. Wind is going to be a factor. These are the potential wind gusts in miles per hour through the course of the weekend. And you could see nobody is really spared. Everyone in the western United States and the western plains, even into the Pacific Northwest here, even across parts of Idaho. Then, of course, the I-25 and I-80 corridors of Wyoming. It's going to be really windy and windy along the Continental Divide into Colorado. But everybody in the West going to experience some amount of wind through the course of the weekend. A lot of this wind is going to be happening today, tonight, into Saturday. Sunday doesn't look like the winds are going to be as much of a factor. When we look at the snowfall, again, this map should look really familiar to you. We've shown you a map like this all winter where we see the snow in the high country, but you get east of the Continental Divide and you just are not going to get much precipitation in this downsloping La Nina-driven weather pattern. But we're going to get some fresh snow into the high country, at least through the beginning of the weekend. And that will add to the snowpack and also add to the avalanche danger. But we may see that kind of stop for a little bit. I'll show you why. This is the upper level chart for Monday afternoon. The next storm system here is showing signs of splitting, with a piece heading off into the Pacific and another piece coming into the Pacific Northwest and riding along the U.S.-Canadian border. Notice all the cold air, all the blue up here in the northern hemisphere, up into the higher latitudes. Well, that stays up there, but what happens is we're sort of seeing a readjustment in the jet stream. Now, this is something to be expected after the big Arctic outbreak earlier in the month. Over the last couple of weeks, the trend has really been cold. a lot of times you're going to see the jet stream readjust across the northern hemisphere. And what it will do is, in this readjustment phase, we're likely going to hit a quieter stretch of weather. Since this storm is splitting, we're not likely going to see a trough here. And what will happen is you're going to see this break off of this vortex of cold and end up in the North Pacific. And this is what happens by late next week. This vortex of colder air and low pressure in the North Pacific kind of breaks off from the main core of cold up here. And it's going to sit out here for a little bit. And what that will do is that will build a ridge of high pressure over the Rockies and High Plains. When you get low pressure in the Gulf of Alaska, you're going to get warmer here in the western United States. So what will happen is the middle to the end of next week, if this pattern unfolds, and it looks like it does, we're going to have a big warm up and a taste of spring-like weather. Now, I know a lot of you are going to be really happy about that. We actually could get quite mild during the second half of next week into the beginning of next weekend. Now, on the flip side, we need moisture, especially on the plains, and you really look at March as one of those months where you get spring moisture. So this is one of those double-edged swords. Some of you are going to be really, really happy with that warmer weather, but some of you are going to be sad because that is a dry pattern for most of next week into the start of next weekend. So it depends on what side of the fence you want to be on. However, I will tell you this, long term, what will likely happen is that this low, while it will sit off the West Coast, will come inland. And we're expecting that around or after March 10th, it gets stormy again. So watch around that 10th of March or so for the weather pattern to get colder and hopefully wet in the western United States. But at least for the first week of March, it looks like it'll come in like a lamb. Temperature-wise, this is what it could be like by next Friday. These are all temperatures relative to average. So the western United States has a big warm-up. Again, it may not be a trend that lasts all month. We don't think it will, but at least for early March, you'll get a little taste of spring-like weather conditions. Now, I want to point out this article that's been brought to my attention, and I can't stress strongly enough how this article makes a lot of sense based on researching what has happened over the last 70 years of looking at La Niñas and El Niños and looking how that relates to production, beef production in the Western High Plains. Now, this article is for Eastern Colorado. And right here in the headline, it says, early warning for stocking decisions in Eastern Colorado. This paper, written just last month, in December, this is well timed because it, as you know, by watching this podcast, we're talking about La Nina continuing into the spring and summer of 2021. And with La Nina continuing, this is something that's going to play a role in stocking decisions, but not only for Eastern Colorado. This will also relate to Eastern Wyoming, Western Nebraska, Western Kansas, into the panhandles, where we are really sensitive to these La Nina weather patterns. I really highly recommend you read this article. This article also gives you a decision tree on helping you making stocking decisions based on where we are at with La Nina and El Niños. The paper goes in depth about these warm and cold phases in the Pacific, just like what we've been talking about in this podcast for the last year, how sensitive we are to these La Nina and El Nino weather patterns. You can find the paper here. I know that's a long URL to write down, but I'll leave this up on the screen, or you can go back to the screen. But this is one of those articles you want to read, you want to download, and you want to save for future use. I think it's spot on how these La Niñas and El Nino patterns really affect grazing conditions and beef production during these warm and cold phases of the Pacific. Also, I have this in PDF form. More than happy to email it to you as well. Just send an email at podcast@dayweather.com. Thanks for lots of your emails yesterday. I got a lot of questions that we'll tackle next week because we may not have a lot of weather to talk about. Have a great weekend, everyone.